When I think of the term cult classic, one of the first series that pops into my head is The Legacy of Kain. This is a series that has not received a sequel since 2003, and despite that fact, a recent Kickstarter for a graphic novel has, at the time of writing this, raised nearly $1.8 million.
Over $1.8 million now.
It is a testament to the staying power this series had. More than 20 years on, and the series is not only remembered, it is beloved. For many, the obsession with this series began with Soul Reaver. Though not the first title in the series, it was the first to bring the game into the 3D space. It changed the top-down hack-and-slash from Blood Omen, and opened up both the world and the gameplay, taking things from an action focus to creating a far more slow-burning experience that stuck with players for hours, months, and years past its completion. Why has this series kept such a rabid following all these years later? I hope you'll stick around to find out.
Kain is deified. The clans tell tales of him. Few know the truth. He was mortal once, as were we all. However, his contempt for humanity drove him to create me and my brethren. I am Raziel, firstborn of his lieutenants. I stood with Kain and my brethren at the dawn of the Empire. I have served him a millennium. Over time, we became less human and more divine. Kain would enter the state of change and emerge with a new gift. Some years after the Master, our evolution would follow, until I had the honor of surpassing my lord. For my transgression, I earned a new kind of reward. Agony.
Soul Reaver had an interesting development. The mythos and world of Soul Reaver were originally created by Silicon Knights, the creators of the original Blood Omen. Somewhere in the development cycle, things broke down with Silicon Knights, leading to the game being developed by their prior publisher, Crystal Dynamics. Every other title in the series would then be developed by Crystal Dynamics, but the difficulty in divorcing the world of Nosgoth from their original creators meant Soul Reaver would release later than expected, and with less features than originally intended. Much of the originally planned content was cut, at least one boss failed to make an appearance, and the myriad of powers Raziel would gain throughout his journey was lessened significantly. There was even purportedly a full-on elemental system for the game's titular weapon, the Soul Reaver. Instead, we only received a half-baked fire system. Despite all this, the game we were delivered was far from incomplete. The story elements were much improved, both in delivery and substance. The gameplay systems were completely reworked, and the move to full 3D that not only looked beautiful, but also ran more smoothly than the original 2D Blood Omen was a testament to the quality of this production. Our story starts more than a millennium after the events of Blood Omen. That title ended with Kain refusing to sacrifice himself to save the Pillars of Nosgoth. His refusal to end his life and allow the Pillars to heal set the world on a course for decay and death that could not be stopped. In the last 1,000 years, Kain has built himself as a god figure, ruling over as uncontested Lord of Nosgoth, proudly leading his empire from a throne crafted from the crumbled remains of the Pillars themselves. In this time, Kain has evolved, becoming more bestial and less human, not unlike Vorador, Kain's elder vampire ally from the original. Kain has also raised 6 vampire lieutenants to help him with ruling his empire, each with their own distinct clan and territory who all swore fealty to Kain. One of these lieutenants is Raziel, the protagonist of Soul Reaver. At the outset of our story, Raziel has come for an audience with Kain, to show his lord that he too has been evolved by the passage of time. Raziel will be the first vampire to grow wings. Seemingly jealous of his underling's advanced evolution, Kain not only destroys Raziel's wings, but rips the bones right off his back, leaving the loyal lieutenant in searing agony at his feet. Absolutely brutal stuff. Not that Kain was ever a good guy, but he was always at least a sympathetic character, doing what he had to do to survive a fate unjustly thrust upon him. Here, though, it's hard to see him as little more than an aggressor, pulling the wings off of a moth for his own sick amusement. Though thoroughly destroyed, this isn't enough for our tyrannical vampire lord. Raziel's broken body is dragged to the Lake of the Dead, and his own brothers throw him in at their lord's command. The slow sink to the bottom is torture for Raziel. His body is torn and destroyed by the damaging whirlpools, until he eventually comes to rest at the bottom for untold centuries. Before madness can claim him, Raziel is given a reprieve from the damnation he has been so unjustly sentenced to, and a bellowing voice informs the broken vampire, "You are worthy." As stated, the gameplay for Soul Reaver is a big change from the original, and in fact I would argue the genre for this title is completely different. While I would consider Blood Omen a hack-and-slash adventure game, Soul Reaver falls more into the category of exploration-based puzzle solver that just happens to have combat. Combat is methodical to the point that it is rare you will ever fight more than 2 enemies at once, with the great majority of encounters being 1v1. Mostly you're going to be fighting vampires that are heavily resistant to physical damage, and while you could damage and stun enemies with Raziel's claws, killing enemies completely would require some creative solutions. Early game, before you have many other options, the environment was your best bet to take down enemies permanently. You could do things like throw vampires into fire or water, or you could impale them and steal their souls to destroy their physical bodies. Spikes came in the form of wall-mounted, and the many equipable spears you could find lying around. I haven't mentioned it yet, but the title of this game is very literal. We'll talk about why later on, but Raziel's descent through the Lake of the Dead removed his normal vampiric need for blood, and replaced it with a much deeper need to absorb souls. Lucky for us, as it seems this is the best way to keep vampires down for good. You do get more options to take out enemies as the game progresses, including a permanent weapon Raziel can use when he is at full health to attack his enemies. This is usually your most convenient option to clear out vampires, but avoiding a hit and keeping the weapon can be a challenge. Raziel is able to dodge, but Dark Souls this is not, and the animations for dodging and striking can be clunky, often resulting in a hit and loss of your weapon. You do get a ranged attack mid-game, and even the optional ability to launch fireballs with a secret upgrade, so the combat gets significantly easier as the game progresses. The last helper you have in combat are Eldritch Powers. There are 6 of these, and each acts as an AoE spell with a different effect. You have the somewhat useless Force Glyph that pushes enemies back, to the devastating Sunlight and Fire Glyphs that turn all vampires into ash immediately. These abilities are completely optional content, and are fueled by energy you find throughout the game. Exploring and finding these abilities is rewarding in itself, though honestly you could just grab the Fire or Sunlight powers and be fine for the rest. You can also boost your health in the classic Legend of Zelda style by finding power-ups. Each 5 found increasing your health by a small amount. I found upgrading health to be completely arbitrary, however, as to be truly effective in combat you're going to want full health anyway, and if you did run your health to 0 you didn't die. You would instead shift into the Spectral Realm. The swapping between the Material and Spectral Realms was a huge part of the gameplay offered by Soul Reaver. Raziel is no longer a vampire after his resurrection from the Abyss. He is now a ghoul, and his new form allows him to enter the Spectral Realm at will. He could return to the Material Realm from specific locations within the Spectral Realm, so long as his health was at max, once again sort of negating the need for health upgrades. You really want to avoid taking any damage in this game to ensure you're playing optimally. I mean, I guess you could say that about any game, but particularly so here. The Spectral Realm is a reflection of the physical, though often twisted and changed in some way. This would be a huge part of the problem solving. Stuck on the material side? Swap to the spectral realm and find a pillar has contorted to a height that now allows you to climb. Or find there's a gate that you can pass through in your now incorporeal state. Funnily enough, I have actually never had my health run to 0 in the spectral realm. I assume this causes a game over, but really, so far as I know, you cannot die in this game. Probably not true, but a good segue into my next speaking point and my biggest complaint about this title. The game is not difficult. Some of the puzzles require a bit of thinking and creative problem solving, but are otherwise solvable by your average player without much difficulty. The combat can be a touch clunky, but it's more than serviceable and does what it needs to do. Your biggest enemy in this game is by far the camera.
Damn you!
Camera.
You are not God! This act of genocide is unconscionable!
Game!
I'm not usually one to disparage an old game for somewhat off controls, but my god, the camera in this game is a disaster. Outside the camera not pointing where you want, it tends to have a mind of its own. It likes to change directions while you're trying to platform or fight, often causing missed jumps and hits in combat. You can manually move the camera left and right with the left and right triggers, but it moves slow, and will often try to recorrect itself behind Raziel before you can get more than a few steps, making aiming your movement and jumps quite the challenge. In addition to this, there is no way to look up and down naturally. You can stop and enter manual aiming mode, but this doesn't really help if you're mid-leap or mid-combat. Lack of a vertical look in a game that employs a ton of verticality in its level design is a serious hamper. Add into the equation that platforming is already a bit touchy in this entry, and you would find it could get frustrating quite fast. For reference, I played the PS1 version of this game, emulated on a PC. I would have played the PC port directly, as I do own the Steam re-release, but unfortunately at the time of this writing the game has been delisted from Steam and seems to no longer work on a PC at all. At least not on my PC. The good news is that the game really only has a couple points where frantic movement is required, and while those bits are a bit of a nightmare with the hampered controls and camera, the rest of the game is totally fine to play slow and methodical, greatly reducing the frustration the camera will give you. What's even more frustrating than the camera is never getting to the actual story part of this video, so we should probably do that. Raziel is awakened, the many-tentacled creature responsible for reviving us from our eternal torment at the bottom of the Lake of the Dead is known only as the Elder God. He explains to us that the reason for the world's advanced decay and madness is due directly to the vampires created by Kain. Their souls have been removed from the Wheel of Fate, preventing them from completing their destinies. The Elder God's rescue is not a benevolent one, however. He wants us to act as his angel of death, to kill our vampire brothers and seek vengeance on Kain, to return their souls to the Wheel of Fate and allow it to spin once again. Much like Kain before him, it seems Raziel is far more driven by revenge than any desire to save Nosgoth, but the end result would be the same. Regardless, we move through the spectral realm for a time, the Elder God serving as our mentor to our new form and abilities until we eventually find a gate back to the material world. Before long, we find our first combat encounter, and Raziel is disgusted at the state of the vampire fledglings. Once proud warriors, they've become scabrous, twisted abominations in the centuries Raziel spent in limbo. The decay of this world is further evident, seeing the once proud seat of Kain's power a crumbling ruin. We aren't yet able to enter the fortress containing the Pillars of Nosgoth, but instead decide to see how our own clan fared in the time since we've been gone. We find our territory empty, inhabited only by more of the vampire abominations. It is clear our people were scoured from Nosgoth just as we were. Raziel's hatred for Kain grows. All this decay and rot on his behalf. He caused this so that he could live. One life for the life of a planet. Moving past our own territory, we come to the territory of Melchiah, one of our brothers. Here I make my first big mistake of the game. When we enter, there are Melchiah vampire spawn killing a small group of humans. The humans, by default, are not hostile to you. presumably not really knowing what you are. In my attempt to kill one of the vampires, I accidentally start combat with the humans. This sadly tags all humans as hostile for the rest of the game. It's not a huge detriment, as there aren't many humans to begin with, and they're sort of pushovers compared to the vampires, but I still sort of feel bad. They have it hard enough in this world. Moving through Melchiah's territory, we find a large machine of some sort that we must activate to progress. It's a pretty cool set piece, and one of the first big puzzles of the game. It's not hard. Realistically, all you have to do is hit a switch to get things rolling, light some torches, and move some blocks. But it's very satisfying to see the machine humming once again, bringing a touch of life to the otherwise dilapidated world. Once through, we meet the first of our brothers, Melchiah. By all accounts, the weakest of Kain's children. No longer a humanoid vampire, but instead a twisted, hulking abomination. Another reflection of the rotten world Kain created. He gives confirmation we are truly the last of our clan, and attacks. This is our first boss fight, and where we learn that bosses in this game are not your standard hack and slash fare. Each will have some way of defeating it outside of just attacking. This one is pretty obvious. There is a giant spike trap and a cage in the middle of the room. We need to sufficiently injure Melchiah, and then, while he's trapped in the center, drop the ceiling on him. I have to admit, I sort of laughed at his death. He yells, "I am released!" significantly after he's already been pulped.
I'm released.
Anyhow, we absorb his soul and gain our first new ability, the power to walk through grates in the spectral realm. An ability that will be a staple for the rest of the game. With this new power, we're able to get into the area housing the Pillars of Nosgoth, as good a place as any to search for Kain. Turns out the logic tracks. Arriving at the Pillars, there he is, the one and only Kain. I like to imagine he's just been sitting here waiting for us for the last several hundred years. I always found it somewhat odd that Kain himself hadn't become a mutant abomination over the centuries of decay, like his children had. You would think as the catalyst for all this mutation, he would also be affected. But I suppose it is fitting. He sacrificed the world for himself. It makes sense that it would crumble around him while he himself stayed the same. Regardless, we have a good chat with Kain. He pretty well calls us ugly, and our hatred grows as Kain continues to show zero remorse for the world he has created and the lives he has ruined. Soul Reaver, the sword, not you, is drawn, and Kain attacks. If there's one part of this game I wish were different, it is the fights with Kain. He teleports around the room charging up lightning blasts. If you don't reach him and land a hit in time, you're sent to the Spectral Realm, where you need to refill your health and return to the Material Realm to try again. Outside being lame just at face value, Kain charges his attack so fast, and we have such a low attack range, you pretty well need to see where he teleports and start toward him instantly, or he will land a hit. Couple this with the camera fighting you every step of the way, and the fight becomes quite tedious. Lucky for us, 3 hits is all it takes to end this fight. Kain musters his strength to finish us with Soul Reaver, but upon making contact, the sword explodes. Kain seems oddly pleased with this, stating we're moving closer to our destiny. He flees, and we move into the Spectral Realm to absorb the remains of the Cursed Blade. The Soul Reaver is now tied to us, always available in the Spectral Realm, and available in the Land of the Living when we're at full health. It is a powerful tool for destroying vampires, and will remain invaluable for the rest of the game. Well, for the rest of the series, really. There is a reason the games are named after it. Before moving back to the Material Realm, we meet Ariel, our guide from Blood Omen and previous Guardian of Balance. Kain's refusal to sacrifice himself tied her to the Pillars, cursed to haunt them forever. Much like I'm cursed with the need to haunt Swiss Chalet for their delicious quarter chicken dinner, now only $15.29.
Oh my god, stop talking about chicken legs.
Anyhow, she serves as a guidepost if you get lost. Just come back here and she'll point you in the right direction. Frustratingly, she usually gives you a cardinal direction in a game with no map or compass. Saying go east generally has no meaning in this game, but still, it's nice to have that option to seek help. Moving on from here, we use our new sword to gain access to the Silenced Cathedral. At one time, this massive structure, created by the humans, used sound to repel the vampire menace. Now, in its corrupted state, it has become host to Zephan's clan. They have been twisted and mutated to match the tower's verticality, becoming spider-like in their appearance. The name of the game is climbing this tower to reach the top, and to do that we have a couple interesting climbing puzzles involving the use of the spectral realm. But more than that, we have an obscene amount of block puzzles. I haven't spoken on it yet, but this game loves block dragging puzzles. You can drag them, you can stack them, you can even flip them. It is truly riveting stuff. I do actually generally enjoy these. They are just challenging enough that I feel proud for completing them, but never get stuck. This tower takes it a touch too far though, with 4 of them in quick succession. They are also the only block puzzles you'll do while constantly under attack from vampires, adding a layer of tension to the whole thing. They're a fine addition to the area and to the game as a whole, but maybe half as many would have been enough. Coming higher into the tower, we notice the once purely stone and metal architecture changes to a more organic and insectoid lair. Really gave me those same vibes that System Shock did when you reach Shodan's lair. All the inorganic material replaced with something new and worse. At the heart of it all we find Zephan, making his brother Malkaya's mutations seem like nothing. He has become a giant insectoid creature fused with the very walls of this once holy place. Unlike Malkaya, Zephan has no regret at his current state. If anything, he's happy with the decay of the world, and proud of his corruption of the human's weapon. He excitedly awaits the changing of the world Kain has so irredeemably broken. The fight itself once again requires some thinking, and I'll admit, of all the bosses, this one confused me for the longest, though it seems obvious now that I know what to do. He lays eggs. You need to grab those eggs and take them to a small fire source at the entry to the chamber, then throw the flaming eggs at Zephan. 3 eggs later, and he's dead. This game really likes the number 3. We gain the power to scale walls from Zephan's soul, opening up a huge portion of the map to us. I do a lot of wandering, upgrading health and unlocking abilities. Most of this isn't really video worthy, but one optional area of note is the location we unlock the Stone Eldritch power, a power that allows us to petrify enemies. The area is notable for being the now crumbled remains of Nabraptor's mountain lair. For those who didn't play the first game, Nabraptor arguably started this entire mess by corrupting the Circle of Mages when his partner, Ariel, was murdered by Mortanius. Kain eventually killed Nabraptor and took his head as a trophy, but the damage to the pillars, and Nosgoth, was done. This whole area is particularly shocking, as if you'll recall, Nabraptor's lair was situated over a large bustling city and gypsy encampment, in the heart of a rich and vibrant forest. No trace of that remains in Kain's world. It is now a lifeless stone canyon devoid of even the tiniest scrap of life. Anyhow, just a cool lore point. The stone power you gain here is meh at best. Why petrify when you can destroy? Moving on, we make our way to the Tomb of the Seraphan. The Seraphan are, or rather were, an order of vampire hunters from before even the time of Kain. They're responsible for the death of the elder vampires, with the only currently known survivor of their purge being Vorador. He unfortunately died at the hands of Mobius back in Blood Omen 1, making Kain and his brood the only remaining trace of vampire kind. Within the tomb, we receive a major story revelation. The tombs are empty, and each is named for Raziel and his brothers. Kain's lieutenants aren't just random people he chose to raise as vampires. They are the saints of the Seraphan. Raziel and his brothers once nearly wiped vampire kind from the face of Nosgoth, and now they are all that remains of the vampires they so hated. Kain loves irony. Below the tomb, we encounter our first Turelite vampire spawn. Turel, one of our brothers, is sadly part of this game's cut content. While we would find his spawn, the big man himself is sadly absent from this title, the only one of our brothers to be spared our wrath. Regardless, killing the vampire spawn grants us the kinetic blast power. We can now shoot an orb of force, used to both move objects at a range and damage foes. Moving on from here, we are able to reach the Drowned Abbey. These flooded ruins are the home of Rahab. We have reached everyone's favorite mandatory part of every 90s adventure game, the water level. As far as water levels go, it has its annoying parts, but is mostly not too offensive. You don't actually have to spend a ton of time in the water itself, as it'll kill you if you touch it, but the level consists of a lot of precise platforming over the deadly water. At the end, we're met by our now fishy brother Rahab. He seems much more cognizant of the fate that awaits him than his brothers. He seems to not care for his Seraphan origins, and loyal to Kain to the end, even accepting that Raziel will likely kill him. His fight is pretty easy. The Elder God hinted that Rahab's clan were especially weak to the sun, and this room has a bunch of blocked windows surrounding it. If we destroy the windows, we can let the sunlight in and end Rahab. This gives you the ability to swim, opening up most of the locked areas remaining in the game. From here, I do a lot of exploring to gain the remaining powers available to me, including the ability to enchant my sword with fire. As a flaming sword, it's not terribly useful, but it also enhances your kinetic blasts with fire, essentially giving you a fireball spell. We don't use it very often, as it requires both full health and a fire source to enchant the blade, but when you do have it, you're near unstoppable. We additionally get to travel through the human citadel in pursuit of the water glyph. The glyph itself is pretty useless.
Incoming comments about how it's the best glyph in the game.
The human citadel itself is pretty cool though. Completely optional, but a massive area containing the last remnants of the human race. Sadly, my accidental aggression earlier makes them hostile to me, though they aren't particularly dangerous. Once again, coming from Blood Omen, it's shocking to see how far the world has fallen. Once green and lush human villages dotting the landscape are replaced with this stone and metal bastion. One last holdout for probably the last humans to ever exist. I'm not seeing a lot of good soil here. I wonder what they eat to survive. Once our wandering is complete and we have all the optional powers we want, it's on to the final stretch of the game. We have one more brother to slay, and then the big man himself. Swimming past the Lake of the Dead, far to the north we come to the ancient city once ruled by Duma. The place is a graveyard. All Duma's vampires are dead. We suspect Kain is also behind this, but shockingly the Elder God corrects us. Kain didn't kill Duma and his clan. It was the humans. The vampires became so bold and arrogant that they believed the humans posed no threat. That was clearly a mistake, as their once proud and powerful clan was destroyed by the human vampire hunters, leaving the survivors to live on as little more than scavengers in this dead world. Moving through the ruins, we come to a furnace room. Currently not of much help, but we are going to need it before long. We eventually clear our way to the end, Duma's throne room. On the throne lies the vampire lieutenant, impaled with 3 mighty spears. Pulling the spears awakens the brutish vampire, and after some chest thumping and testosterone, he's on the attack. This fight is not particularly difficult, but if you don't know what to do, it can be extremely confusing. Remember that furnace room? We need to guide Duma there, while avoiding getting hit. You can outrun him, and he will chase, but he does a ground slam attack that will stun you if you're touching the ground when it hits. So the trick here is to make sure you're airborne when he's about to strike. Not super difficult to time, the biggest threat here is once again the camera, as you'll be trying to lead Duma while keeping the camera pointed backwards. Once you reach the furnace, it's just a matter of turning it on to turn the vampire into a well-done steak. The power we gain from Duma, the last in the game, is Constrict. Personally not my favorite. It allows you to run in a circle around enemies and special switches to move or immobilize things. We can use it to turn a sundial, granting access to the Oracle Cave. If you'll recall, this is the same cave where Kain met Mobius, the time streamer, all those centuries ago. This area is a culmination of what we've been doing the whole game. There are switch puzzles, block puzzles, timed puzzles, and even one puzzle that forced me to remember what colors mix together to form other colors. All really good stuff. There is even a set piece that matches the Oracle Cauldron from Blood Omen. At the end of it all, we find ourselves on a path to the final confrontation. Along the way, we're given glimpses of events past, present, and yet to come. All of it mysterious and unknown. Perhaps most concerning, we see ourselves destroy the spirit of Ariel. And we see further still, Raziel high atop a power, Soul Reaver glowing red. None of this makes sense to us yet. as time travel plots often don't. Before we can ruminate too heavily on the implications, we find ourselves in the streaming chamber. Kain is here and presumably cornered. He knew you were coming. He says your hate would not let you do anything differently. I guess he isn't wrong. Kain justifies his actions, speaking of destiny and eternity. He wonders what Raziel would do in his place. Raziel remains steadfast he would make different choices, given their positions were swapped. Kain doesn't believe it. He believes we each have a destiny and we must play our parts. He further justifies his resurrection of the Seraphan saints, stating ironically as much as the Seraphan and the vampires opposed each other, they are really the same in the end, both groups so single-mindedly hating the other. None would be better to raise as his lieutenants. Raziel remains steadfast that the Seraphan were the saviors of this world against the corruption the vampires represent. His eyes are now open. The conversation is cut abruptly short as Kain makes his next move. And with that, the battle is on. Once again, I have to sadly admit that this fight is very lacking, and easily the worst fight in the game. Just like the first time we confronted Kain, he has only one trick. He teleports around and shoots a bolt at you if you can't strike in time. The problem with this iteration is that you can only hit him with the Soul Reaver. Claws have no effect, so you need to keep your health at max. There is a healing font in the middle of the room, so the fight boils down to standing in the healing and waiting for Kain to appear, then rushing him when you spot him. The first 2 hits are fine. You can just keep your head on a swivel. Getting in that last hit is an absolute chore. See, after each hit, he teleports 1 level higher, so you need to move further away to catch him, giving you a smaller and smaller opening to get a hit before he hits you. Annoyingly, on the final hit, Kain is so high up you can't see him without entering aiming mode. And if you do that, it's unlikely you can get back to normal vision, climb 3 stories, and strike him before he strikes you. What this sadly leads to is just continuously running up a random ledge until you get lucky and pick the one that he appears on. Nothing says good game design like a random chance. Anyhow, we finally get him, but before the killing blow is struck, Kain manages to open a time portal. He states that this is not where or how it ends, and retreats into the unknown with a sinister laugh. It is clear he wants us to follow. And even the Elder God warns that stepping through the portal will put us beyond his influence. We don't listen. Kain was right. Our hate is too strong, and we plunge headfirst into the portal. Raziel awakens in a darkened room, and who but Mobius himself, apparently not so dead as we thought, comes from the darkness to welcome us. The game ends on a cliffhanger, with this final message from the Time Streamer.
Where time is but a loop, a loose stitch in the universal cloth, a streamer might seize upon a chance, a fatal slip, and plunge the fate of planets into chaos.
Let's round off this Soul Reaver experience with some wonderful reviews. The only real enemy in this game is the camera. Too annoying to play. XD. I actually chose this review not to disparage it for once, but to actually agree. The camera in Soul Reaver is literally the hardest part of this game. It makes Super Mario 64's camera seem like a smooth experience, and when compared to something like Ocarina of Time, a game released prior to this one, it seems downright archaic. Aside from what I've already harped on in my gameplay section, the combat lock is also a mess, forcing you to get super close before it'll lock on. Usually you end up taking a hit just trying to get close enough to actually engage in combat. And as your enemies are vampires, they tend to hop about a lot, so trying to keep them in the frame is a mess. More often than not, I wouldn't bother locking on at all, just doing strafing runs instead with my sword in an attempt to get enemies stunned. I don't agree that it's too annoying to play, but I will say of all the games I've played through on the channel, this is the one that I most wish they would remaster. They can even keep those crispy PS1 graphics. Those are an asset as far as I'm concerned. The game is awesome. The story is great and the bones are all there, but the fighting with that camera not only hinders your gameplay, but makes it harder to fully appreciate the world that Crystal Dynamics built for us. Sure, you can stop and look up and down, but it's so clunky you're likely not going to be doing it much. You should though. Despite the game's very muted color palette, with the heavy brown and grey atmospheres, they did a lot to make some stunning environments. And when you factor in the context of those environments, you start to realize they really made something special with this game. It's a shame something as silly as camera control hampers that vision. Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver is far from perfect, but it is an improvement from the original. This is one of those weird games that players will either cherish or despise, depending on your style. All things considered, it's a pretty solid title with a unique feel. If you're a fan of horror games or Gothic settings, this one is worth a look. I must be in a good mood today, because I'm not exactly disagreeing with this review either. More just using it as a jumping off point. I don't know if it's fair to say Soul Reaver is an improvement from the original. And I don't say that to disparage Soul Reaver. In fact, I think Soul Reaver is far more popular and well known than the original Blood Omen. I more don't think it's fair to compare the games in such a way. Blood Omen certainly had lesser graphics, but the game style was completely different from what we received in Soul Reaver. Both games had an outstanding narrative, voice acting, sound design, and world building. Aside from that, comparing them is like comparing apples and oranges. Both were wonderful additions that fleshed out the series in their own ways, but I couldn't put one over the other. I will also say I don't think this is a game that people either cherish or despise. Look up ratings on this game. It is pretty well universally beloved no matter where you look. Part of the reason I'm being so agreeable with the reviews today is that finding a negative review for Soul Reaver, outside someone disliking the camera or having a technical issue, is nearly impossible. This game is a clunky mess to play, yet somehow has stood the test of time better than most. Remake when, Night Dive? If you clicked on the video and made it this far, it's pretty likely you're as big a fan of this series as I am. I would argue Legacy of Kain is one of the best Gothic game worlds ever built. The cast of characters are compelling and rich. The sound design cannot be topped. I think the main title song, Ozar Midrashim, might be my favorite video game song ever composed. The intricacy of the plot is one that invites you to revisit it time and time again, and the varied powers you gain throughout keep gameplay fresh and engaging. The question we started this video with is why a game series that hasn't seen a mainline release in over 20 years has such a ravenous following. And I think, despite all my ranting and raving, that question can actually be answered quite simply. It is just that good. Sadly, this is the end of the video, but fear not, this is not where or how this story ends. Legacy of Kain will return. See you in the next video.